In January 2018, deep in a sandstone quarry in Northumberland, England, a large slab of rock fell away from a cliff face. When the dust settled, researchers saw something that shouldn't have been there. It looked like a tire track. Two parallel lines, perfectly spaced, winding across the stone for hundreds of feet. If you saw it today, you would assume a 4x4 or a heavy piece of construction machinery had driven through wet cement. The track was 20 inches wide, but this rock was dated to the Carboniferous period, 326 million years ago, long before the first dinosaur, long before the first mammal, and certainly long before the invention of the wheel. This wasn't a machine, it was a footprint. And it belonged to a creature that defies every instinct we have about the natural world. A millipede the size of a crocodile. This was Arthropleura, the largest invertebrate to ever walk the earth. When we think of giants, we think of T-Rex, or Titanoboa, or whales. We think of bones, muscle, and internal skeletons. But Arthropleura was something else entirely. It was an armored tank made of chitin, a multi-legged nightmare that could rear up and look a grown man in the eye. But here is the question that kept paleontologists up at night. How? How does a bug get that big? Biologically, it shouldn't be possible. If you took a modern millipede and magic wanded it to the size of a car, it would die instantly. Its legs would snap under the weight of its armor. It would suffocate within minutes. So why could Arthropleura grow to 8.5 feet long and weigh over 100 pounds? The answer isn't in the ground, it's in the air. Step back 300 million years. Welcome to the Carboniferous, the age of coal. The world is a very different place. It is covered in vast, swampy forests of giant ferns and mosses. There are no flowering plants, no birds singing, just the hum of insects. But the most important difference is invisible. Today, the air you are breathing is about 21% oxygen. In the Carboniferous, oxygen levels skyrocketed to nearly 35%. That might not sound like a huge difference, but biologically, it is rocket fuel. See, insects and arthropods don't breathe like we do. They don't have lungs that actively pump air. They have a passive system, a network of tiny tubes called tracheae that open to the outside air through holes in their sides. In our modern atmosphere, this system is inefficient. It limits how big a bug can get because oxygen can only diffuse so far into their bodies. If they get too big, their insides suffocate. But in the Carboniferous, the atmosphere was practically force-feeding oxygen to life. The air was thick, heavy, and intoxicating. Fires burned hotter and faster, and biology took the brakes off. Dragonflies grew wingspans of 2.5 feet. Scorpions grew to the size of dogs. And Arthropleura became a titan. But size came with a cost. The mystery of Arthropleura isn't just how it breathed, but how it moved. It didn't have an internal skeleton to support its weight. It relied on a hard exoskeleton. But at that size, a shell becomes incredibly heavy. Recent biomechanical studies suggest that Arthropleura solved this with engineering. Its body was wide and flat, spreading its weight over a massive surface area. It had dozens of pairs of legs moving in a metachronal wave, a ripple of motion that distributed the load perfectly. It didn't scuttle, it flowed, a carpet of armor undulating over the forest floor, crushing the vegetation beneath it. So what did this monster eat? For a long time, we assumed it was a predator. When you see a giant armored bug, you assume it's a killer. Early art depicted it hunting amphibians, tearing them apart with massive mandibles. But the truth is perhaps even stranger. We have found gut contents in some fossils, and we found spores, ferns, lycopods. Arthropleura wasn't a lion, it was a cow. A 2-meter-long, 100-pound armored cow. It was a detritivore. It wandered the gloom of the coal forests, recycling the rotting matter of the giant ferns. It was the janitor of the Carboniferous. But imagine stumbling upon it. A creature that looks like it crawled out of a horror movie, moving with absolute silence, rasping at a rotting log. It had few predators. Even the early amphibians and reptiles of the time were too small to tackle a fully grown adult. It was an armored fortress. But like Titanoboa, Arthropleura had an Achilles heel. It was a prisoner of its own success. Its massive size was a direct result of the high oxygen atmosphere. It was chemically dependent on the air itself. As the Carboniferous ended, the world changed. The climate dried out. The vast coal swamps fragmented and collapsed. But the real killer was the drop in oxygen. As atmospheric oxygen levels began to fall back toward modern levels, the fuel that powered Arthropleura's massive body ran out. As atmospheric oxygen levels began to fall back toward modern levels, the fuel that powered Arthropleura's massive body ran out. The younger generations simply couldn't grow as large. Their passive breathing tubes couldn't deliver enough air to sustain a giant body. They suffocated in an atmosphere that was becoming normal. And there was another problem: molting. To grow, an arthropod has to shed its shell. For a small spider, this takes minutes. For a creature the size of a car, shedding its armor was a dangerous, exhausting process that left it soft and vulnerable for days. As the oxygen dropped and the swamps dried up, this process became biologically impossible. Arthropleura vanished, not because it was hunted to extinction, but because the chemistry of the planet shifted. It left behind only tracks, tire marks in the stone, reminding us of a time when the air was thick, the forests were alien, and the bugs were big enough to chase cars. Thank you. And until next time, you can watch this video here. I think you'll love it.